Buenos nachos and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode we're going to be installing a Retro Gem into a PlayStation 2 Slim console, SCPH-70012. Without further ado, let's begin. Alright, we have our PlayStation 2 Slim console. We've already removed most of the screws. And you're just going to want to take the top cover off and undo your cables for the laser assembly and of course your power on off. You just pull it out very gently, and the same thing goes with your battery and your fan connector over here on this side. Just pulls right out. You can wiggle it. And the laser assembly, I mean, it'll be tougher to show as I'm wearing gloves, but you just pull that straight up and wiggle it out. And this right here has a tab holding it in place, so you need to lift up the tab and then it'll come right out. And this right here, I find it's easiest to just kind of wiggle it out like that. Now the laser still has a ribbon hooked up here in the back, so you want to gently lift up the flap and then you can release it. I've already gone ahead and removed most of the screws in this console aside the 56K modem assembly here, which I'm going to go ahead and remove now. We'll go ahead and remove these screws using our new screw bit set. I believe this is going to be, what, like a pH 2.5 maybe? Yeah, that'll work. When you're working on one of these Slim consoles, you don't always get lucky. You're not always one of the lucky individuals that has a 56K modem just right here waiting. And it comes out just like that. Just wiggle it out and pulls right out. Go ahead and set these parts to the side. I'm almost certain the battery that was here is dead. That's probably something you'll want to replace when you're reassembling the console. And the metal shrouds just come out just like that. And the board just lifts up from the back and pulls out. That way you can go ahead and get past the memory card slot. And once again, I've already removed screws, so that's why this console's kind of falling apart. One thing I do want to bring attention to is you can definitely tell somebody has already been in here in the past and installed a mod chip. The question is, what does the work look like in the back? It's the moment of truth here. Doesn't look like hot glue is used, but plenty of electrical tape was. It's not a bad install, best I can tell so far. I don't think we'll need to touch any of this, so we're going to leave it alone for now, and if it starts to get in our way, then we'll go ahead and start removing some of this. Well, you know what? It's kind of tempting. I want to see what kind of chip was under this. Looks like we had a Modbo 4.0. I don't see the Mechacon fix here, though. That's something that'll need to be rectified. So at this point, we're going to want to start getting our components out of the Retro Gem bag, and of course our flex cables out of here as well. I almost don't even want to do this install because I know how much labor is going to be involved. There's a reason people are scared of the Slim consoles. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set the jumpers for the Retro Gem, and we'll be using our trusty Hako soldering iron tip, T15 BC1. Go ahead and get our vacuum going. And we will be using some ROHS compliant soldering today, just because I have it available. We need to close jumper points C, D, E, and J if I'm not mistaken. Now you'll notice that those don't look extremely shiny. That's because we don't have that much flux in our solder. And of course, I'm sure I'm going to ruin everything right now. That came out decent. And now we need the J point. And that actually doesn't look like it's going to require any flux, so we're good. So those are all set. Set that to the side. We'll worry about cleaning up that flux when we're close to the end. Or, well, maybe sooner actually, because I think we're going to have to handle this board. We're going to be bringing out our flux remover. So as you can tell right here, it's an MG Chemicals flux remover. And the particular model on this one is 4140A. I recently started using this stuff and it's not bad, I gotta tell you. It is not bad. So I'm just going to stick a Q-tip in here, get a little bit, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to go over this. So with a Q-tip, a couple of passes, and there you go. And let's go ahead and get this J point. And it's as simple as that. and you could pick up your flux remover today. All of the tools and supplies used in today's episode will be linked in the description below. Depending on your version of Slim console, you may be following a different set of installation instructions in the guide, and I'll be using the pH 2.5 tip to go ahead and tighten these screws and nuts down just a tad. You don't want to over tighten them, otherwise you'll break the 3D printed plastic, and you don't want to do that. So now that we have this assembled right here, the next thing you'll be doing is you'll be cutting some of this metal shroud right here in this area. We'll of course be using our wire cutters. If you want to call these wire cutters, they're metal shears. You're not going to be able to see very much, but I will try my best. Now the guide has suggested that you use wire cutters or some kind of pliers like these. You may end up breaking your teeth on this thing, so I don't know if you want to do that. And the next thing I will do is I'm going to go just back and forth right here with a pair of pliers. I think these are called lineman pliers if I'm not mistaken, but someone in the comments can correct me. Unless of course the editor wants to go ahead and Google what those look like. And we're just bending this thing back and forth until it comes out of there. And there you go. Now you're going to have some sharp edges, so you're going to want to take care of that. This side over here is sharp. I suppose what you could do is you could use some other kinds of pliers and kind of just bend that piece back and forth till it comes off. We have to take off this leg part. So let me go ahead and just fold this down, and we'll go ahead and bend that piece back and forth. And there you are. Now that's how it looks. So we cut right here, we removed all of this. The next thing we'll go ahead and trim off is the shielding right here. So according to the guide, it is 4 pieces of metal that need to be cut off or trimmed off. And once again, we're just back and forth. Not much to it. And I think we're all done as far as trimming metal. The next tough part is trimming the plastic on the top shell right here. And of course this notch. So that we can do with our pliers. So for identification purposes, landmarks, you have your 56K modem hole right here, and then we have the Ethernet hole if I'm not mistaken, and then the screw post right over here. It's my understanding that this piece all the way to right here needs to be removed, and supposedly this needs to be sanded down some more, but for this particular model I guess I'm gonna have to do some placement stuff to see how it sits, because this looks fine in comparison to the other Slims that I've messed with. So first things first, let's go ahead and cut off this plastic here. I'm going to use a good old-fashioned X-Acto blade with the flat end, and I'm just going to press into the plastic, and I'll do the same over here on this other side of the post. Alright, and at this point you can take your fine needle nose pliers and kind of just bust out the plastic. So I'm just going to twist it like this right here, and it comes out no problem. There you have it. Now if you want to, you can go ahead and shave this down a little bit with your X-Acto blade. That way it's nice and flush. Alright, so we got pretty lucky with our Slim console here. So the Retro Gem will mount. We do have a couple of holes that we can use, so that one's one. However, we're going to need to drill a hole right there. So let's go ahead and mark that with a Sharpie or any other kind of pen that you have that has a fine enough tip to go ahead and get into that hole. So make sure you hold the Retro Gem in place with the screw hole that is already there. And you're just going to press right through, and that's how you'll make your mark. And of course, that was while keeping this hole as aligned as much as possible. Next, we're going to want to bring out the drill. So I already have the drill out here. All right, so we have our Makita drill bits right here. And of course, we have our DeWalt drill. I believe this is a 20 volt max drill. So the drill bit that we'll be using today is the 5/64. It's actually a little bit bigger than what the hole needs to be, but I don't want to have to deal with trying to struggle getting the screw in there. So in this case, we're going bigger. Whether bigger is always better, well, we'll let you decide. So the next thing we're going to do is get a block of wood and put it underneath this hole. So there are easier, better ways to do this as outlined in the Guido, but I'm going to just use a big block of wood, and that'll do. Get this thing aligned as best as possible. Start off slow. All right. We made it through, and you'll want to make sure you get any metal shavings off of anything that you're going to be working on. We don't want any shorts later. All right, so now we can go ahead and move the drill away. So now that we have our new hole created, let's go ahead and see how this thing mounts in. Ah, yes. And the fact that I made the hole a little bit bigger means we'll have a little bit more give, so we'll have more room to work in case the board somehow was not aligned properly or things moved on us. So next thing, we're going to mount this Retro Gem to the chassis metal. All right, so we'll go ahead and start by putting this screw in here. You don't want to tighten it down too much because then you'll ruin the threads. And we do have our other screw hole right here. So what you need to do is you need to install a brass nut in the back, and we're going to do that via the power of soldering. So we're going to go ahead and put this screw through, and we'll go ahead and attach the nut in the back. Now I know that's going to add more thermal mass to what we're about ready to do, but this is probably going to be the easiest way for me to do it. If you have a different way of doing this, you can leave it in the comments below. We're going to go ahead and switch soldering iron tips. We've switched over to the T15D24. That way we have a little bit more surface area to work with. And I'm going to be using some leaded solder for this particular soldering job. Now I'm sure what I put on there is already good enough, but I don't want to do things just good enough. Alright, that should be a good enough joint. Go ahead and use our alcohol to kind of just wipe away any potential residual flux. I don't think there was any, just because this solder doesn't have a whole tremendous amount of flux in it. And there you have it. The Retro Gem is now mounted into the chassis, so let's go ahead and see how it fits. Then we'll determine whether we need to do any plastic cutting, which I'm pretty sure we will. So the bottom looks like it fits okay. However, we need to examine the top, which I'm pretty sure we're gonna have to cut some of this shell. Oh wow, it looks like we don't. I was really thinking that we were gonna have to do some cutting. Maybe I'm speaking too soon. We'll find out here in a second. Let's go ahead and just mount this board on real quick. I'm just so used to the Slims requiring a bunch of cutting on the shell here. Maybe this won't be as devastatingly difficult as I thought it would be. And there you have it. I would say that that's actually a pretty clean mount right there. I definitely say the Pixel FX team definitely thought this through. Very nice. So now that we have our mounting done, we're going to go ahead and start up on the soldering. Alright, so our revision board that we're working on is a GH03222, which is not in the Guido. They have a 32 in there. Best I can tell, it looks identical to the 32. I do want to state that once we get closer to the end, we'll go ahead and see if the Retro Gem actually does indeed fit properly with the top shell on, because I'm kind of hesitant to believe that we don't need to do any plastic shaving. So we'll see. Alright, we'll start by adding a little bit of flux to our solder points. And you'll be folding this over. And I'm just doing that to tack it down real quick. I'll add a little bit of flux. And since we're not coming back to this area, now would be the best time to go ahead and remove the flux. So now that we have our controller flux installed, we're going to go ahead and install to the IC. So you'll need to make a couple of folds on this ribbon, and you'll need to install it like so. Probably should get a better grip on this. Just add a tiny bit of flux there, and we'll see if we can tack this down with the residual solder that's on the tip. And we'll just add a little bit more solder just to make sure that the connections are secure. Alright, and that looks pretty good. You'll want to clean up your flux. And I guess now would be a good time to flatten this cable out. That's probably about as good as it's going to get. So the next thing we need to do is install our SP diff wire. Just go ahead and get our wire strippers here, and we'll go ahead and strip back a little piece. And we'll be installing that wire over in this vicinity. Add some flux. So if there's a little I was going to say there was too much slack on that wire, but that right there is fine. And of course we're going to leave a little bit of slack, so I'll probably take it to right there. So now the main portion of the assembly. Alright, so we have a few components that we need to remove. I'm just going to add some solder to them and they'll come right off. So the first one is going to be this guy. See, now the coffee's kicking in. There we are. So I'm guessing that we didn't really do any kind of damage over here. Now would be the time to use some desoldering wick. You'll want to clean up the residual flux, and you'll want to get a couple slivers of Kapton tape installed in this area. And now we'll be installing the main flex. We're going to be swapping back to the T15 BC1. And I find it's easiest to just get a couple of spots tacked down. That way you can make sure you have everything aligned before you finalize your soldering. And next we'll be adding our flux and our solder. And we do have this side that we need to solder on as well. So the next place that we'll be soldering is of course our voltage lines. Wasn't actually expecting that to happen. Yeah, that joint looks pretty good. Next, we'll go ahead and install this right here. We'll add a little bit of flux. Those spots are all set, so we're going to go ahead and clean up some more flux. And now, the main flex. And we'll of course be using our ROHS compliant solder. It may actually surprise you, but most of that most likely is connected. So let's go ahead and use some desoldering wick over here. Let's go ahead and get zoomed in some more. we'll see how this looks once we've soldered the other sides. And one final side. See if I can hold this in place without it moving here. We'll go ahead and clean off the flux and see how we're doing. All right, we took a little break. Now let's go ahead and clean off that flux. Let's go ahead and see how this looks after we dry this flux off. So most of these joints look fine. The third from the right looks like it has some kind of a problem. Of course, that could just be artifacting from the light. Nonetheless, we'll go ahead and check it out and see what's going on here. Yeah, that looks like a cracked solder joint. Ah, much better. And I'd say that's looking much better. Let's take a look over here. I'd say we can use a little bit more solder on that last one, but the other joints look great. And now the final side. I'd say it looks pretty good. Next thing to do is to install our reset wire, and that's going to be way over here under all of this tape. Ah, I guess it did have the laser protection circuit. Of course, this is this is kind of old though. It's all the diodes, and our reset line taps in right there. Can we get by just hooking it up to the mod bow here? Now let's run it to the reset line right here and see what happens. So we're going to route it from right over here, straight down this way, and there you are. And you'll want to adjust your wire placement. That way it's not overlapping on those resistors, and just be careful. And I think we're good to install our screws, so we'll go ahead and do that. Now the magnet on this bit is pretty powerful. And one final screw. Let's go ahead and close up the PS2 for the moment and see how everything kind of sits in here. So I don't see any bowing, so it doesn't really look like you're going to need to trim down any of the plastic underneath this section. So now we need to fold over this ribbon, which is probably one of the most difficult parts. Alright, so we need to fold over this cable, that way it goes into this connector right here. Not going to be the funnest, so I'll start off by putting it in there. I already don't like how it's looking. I mean, you probably could get away with it looking like that. That's not how it's tucked in the guide, but that does work. Yeah, I mean, that does work. So now we have the SP diff line that we need to go ahead and solder in. So that's one final soldering. Our F point is right there for the SP diff line. I'll go ahead and strip back some of this wire and we'll get that soldered in. So I usually like to leave a little bit of slack, and I'm going to add some flux in there, just a very tiny amount. At least that's what was dispensed. And we're still using our ROHS compliant solder, and it's most likely going to be easier to do this with tweezers, so that's what I'm going to do. That looks like a pretty good joint. You'll want to tuck this wire in an out of the way place. And next is installing the antennae. So we'll go ahead and do that. So it goes right in there like that. You can use tweezers to help yourself along. As for the routing of this, let's go ahead and see. They've routed it around the fan. I know I can't do what they've done in the guide because their wire is longer than ours. If I were to run it over the top right here, we could probably get away with it, but I don't like that. So what I'll do is I'll route from right here to the front of this fan grill because it would appear that PixelFX has not given us the correct length wire. So I can't run it over here. It just will not happen. I don't know why in the guide the wire is longer than it actually really is. This won't really block all too much of the airflow, so we should be fine. And then now you want to place your antenna just like that. And now would be the time to remove any residual flux that you may have left behind, which I do have some right there. We'll put the remainder of the screws in and we'll see how this thing sits. And if it's good, we'll power up the console. The screws went back in without a hitch. So that's how it's looking right now. Let's go ahead and plug this in. And let's boot it up. Looking like we're working. Let's go ahead and get into the menu. Change it to 720p since we're not fortunate enough to have the shiny edition. And looks like we're looking pretty good. Looks like we've successfully completed the install of the Retro Gem into this PlayStation 2 Slim console. I think after having done a couple of these, I can honestly say that the Slim is probably still the more difficult install over the fat PlayStation 2 console. There's just a lot more finer intricacies when it comes to installing into the PlayStation 2 Slim. A lot less room for sure. Well, it's up to you to decide whether this was our most difficult install yet. If you found this video helpful or useful, please remember to leave us a like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Until next time.